Just now. Okay, that's great, John. I'm glad to hear it's fixed. So good morning, everyone. And for those of you who were here last week, and this is, of course, part 2 of employing an apprentice in a technical role. And there might perhaps be people here who weren't able to join us, but who have been able to watch the recorded sessions. So they are available on our YouTube, and you can find them kind of on our Twitter and stuff if you need a direct link. I'll also pop the link in the chat throughout today's session. And I'll hand over to Karen and Caleb for part 2 of this session.
Thanks very much, Sav. So we'll just introduce ourselves first of all. So I'm Caleb Wright. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Apprenticeship Scheme Manager here at the University of Birmingham. I work in our HR team looking at supporting how we use apprenticeships across our university, including technical apprenticeships. We have quite a few technical apprenticeships in lots of different areas. And we've been kind of running our apprenticeship scheme since 2016. I'll pass over to Karen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Karen Bailey-Smith at Sheffield Hallam University, and I am a technical development lead within our technical services, so I have a cross-service role. I employ a couple of apprentices at the moment, but that is expanding in September, so that's really good. As Caleb said, the background work we've been doing as well on the higher education standard as well, the Trailblazer group work there. So
thanks, Karen. So I'm just going to share the presentation. Hopefully everyone will see it. Any issues, let me know. Can everyone see that?
It's just paused, I think, briefly, Caleb.
Okay.
It's just on your Zoom screen at the moment.
Okay, it says it's sharing, so I'll just go try that again. Is that working?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to pass to Karen for the first couple of slides, and Karen will just talk through an overview of the session and starting a bit of background.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to move people out of the way. No offense. It's lovely to see so many faces. It's great. So yeah, I appreciate some of you today may not have been able to attend last week's session for whatever reason, but that's not a problem. As Savannah said, our sessions are recorded and things and available on the NTDC website. So we'll just do a quick review of the background to apprenticeships. And then today's session is talking about, once you've appointed your apprentice, enrolling them, the first 3 months. That covers induction at work, induction with the education provider, whether that be training, ironing out any kind of registration issues. We'll talk about the types of things that you would be asking your apprentice to do, the roles and responsibilities during their apprenticeship. The 6-hour rule, previously 20% rule, so this is about the off-the-job training and things like that. And then the endpoint assessment, often referred to just as EPA. So that's the point at which the apprentice is ready to be assessed in a variety of different ways, depending on their assessor, and that is them passing their apprenticeship and potentially any associated qualification with that. So as ever, we will have some time for questions at the end, but feel free to put them in the chat. We will try and answer as many as possible. Sometimes we do get quite a lot of questions and we don't want to not answer, obviously, and miss them out. So if we do run out of time, Caleb and myself will work with Savannah, and we will answer the questions remotely and post all that information out to you all and onto the NTDC website, so that you've got a comprehensive set of answers to any questions. At the bottom though as well, you can also there's the link there to send us your questions, but I think actually that would be through the NTDC site. Thank you, Caleb. Okay, so we've covered this a little bit before about what an apprenticeship actually is. It's a job with training. Okay, so the apprentice gains the technical knowledge, the practical experience, and then the wider skills and behaviours that they need to be competent in their immediate job and their future career. And that definition, if you like, comes from the ESFA, or the agency there. Not too much has really changed in terms of the balance of the off the job and on the job training. So the off the job training for the apprentices is about them learning brand new knowledge and skills, and the on the job training is about them carrying out those skills, so they're perfecting that knowledge through the application in their workplace. Thank you.
So thank you, Karen. And as I say, we're just really recapping some of the stuff from last week. So on apprenticeship funding, most universities are able to access the apprenticeship levy. The apprenticeship levy is a tax on all large employers if a pay bill is more than £1.5 million a year. It equates to 0.5% of the pay bill. And what happens is it gets taken out via HMRC and then gets given back on an online government account to either spend or not spend. You've got a certain amount of months to spend it. 24 months to spend it. If you don't, you lose those funds. You can also transfer it to other employers. Some institutions maybe don't have sufficient apprenticeship levy or don't have any apprenticeship levy because they're smaller, so you can get funding from a donor organisation or co-investment where the government pays 95% of the training fee and you pay 5% of the training fee. And just to clarify, this is the English funding model. If you're tuning in from Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, the skills agenda is devolved in those nations. So some of the mechanisms are slightly different, and certainly the funding mechanism is different. But a lot of what we're going to cover today around practical tips for supporting apprentices will be completely relevant. But just the funding mechanism here we're talking about is the English funding system. So when you've started your apprenticeship, so if you remember from the last session, if you were able to attend, if not, as we've said, it is on the NTDC website. We got to the point of working out why we'd use an apprentice, where they would perhaps fit in, what they're going to be doing. We'd gone out to advert, we found our training provider, recruited our apprentice. So now the apprentice is starting. And one of the things to be aware of is the apprenticeship funding rules. So apprenticeships in terms of funding regulations and the financial regulations sit under the Education and Skills Funding Agency, which is an arm of the Department for Education. In terms of the quality of an apprenticeship, the training provider is monitored via Ofsted, and that includes degree apprenticeships now. The Education Skills Funding Agency is to make sure essentially that there are rules and regulations to make sure that it's a genuine apprenticeship, and that the apprentice is getting what they should get out of the relationship, and that the funding indeed is being used correctly. It can be a bit daunting if you look at the funding rules book, and hopefully you'll have someone like me that can support you in your university to understand it. Currently 132 pages of it, so it is rather a lot. But the main things really to be aware of, and I think if you follow these things, you're not going to go too far wrong, is that it is a genuine apprenticeship. So the apprentice will be able to learn the knowledge and skills of the apprenticeship standard that they are studying and that they're learning. That you've got adequate apprenticeship duration, so your contract time for the apprentice is of an adequate length so that they can complete it. And that we follow the off-the-job rule, which we will talk about a bit later on. So the first thing that will happen is that your training provider should enrol the apprentice on. Now, in my experience, that happens at various points. Ideally, it should happen in the first week. Occasionally, providers have been very proactive and actually done a lot of the enrolment paperwork before the apprentice has started. Unfortunately, in some cases, we've had it a while later. My view is that you should chase your provider. Don't wait for them to come, because if your apprentice is on a fixed term contract, then it is a ticking clock from the moment they start. So you need to ensure that they're properly enrolled, because that will trigger the start date of the apprenticeship training period. So you have your apprenticeship employment contract period, but you also have the training period. The employment contract should cover the length of time needed to complete the training period. So if, for example, your provider doesn't start enrolment until a month after the apprentice has actually started, you may well need to add a month onto the contract duration. So enrolment covers some important processes. So the first thing is an initial needs assessment, looking at where the apprentice is at the moment. So sometimes they will do a skills scan. Often we find our apprentices want to rate themselves really highly on the skills scan, which is great, but the problem in doing that is they're essentially saying they don't need the apprenticeship training. A training plan, which for those of you that have had apprentices before may know as the commitment statement. That's a new change in the funding rules. But essentially it's the same document. So it's a kind of agreement that the apprentice will commit to doing the work, that you'll commit to supporting them, and the provider will commit to providing the training. There should be an employer and provider contract in place. So that's a contract for services between you and the training provider. Very often the training provider will have their own contract. My advice is to make sure you get that checked by your legal department or your procurement department. At Birmingham, we actually try and give the training providers our own contract. And my advice is that works better if you can, because then you know you're in control of it. Apprenticeship agreement is a government document, literally for the apprentice to confirm they know they are on an apprenticeship. And then there should be an individual learning plan and a schedule of learning from the training provider. And that's really important, so that you know what your apprentice is studying when they're studying it, and when they've got to go into college or to their training provider location, and an individual learning plan, so that you know what stages they should be at in terms of any assignments, any progress towards their endpoint assessment. Your organisation, if it hasn't already, will need to sign up to the Government Digital Apprenticeship Service, which is like a very large online bank account. It can only, as I say, spend the funds on apprenticeship training. It can't be spent on anything else. So a bit more detail on that. The education provider at the start will do those 3 documents with your apprentice, and will need to involve line managers. So they'll look at the initial needs assessment, the learning plan and schedule of learning. So it will include the skills scan. It will also include English and maths testing. And this is something that we mentioned last week, but it is quite important to note. Regardless of if your apprentice has English and maths at GCSE C and above, or 4 to 9 in new money, they will do a test for competency for basic English and maths to see if they need any support during the apprenticeship. If your apprentice does not have English or maths, C or above, or 4 to 9, they will need both of those before they can do the endpoint assessment, unless it is a level 2 apprenticeship. But these are pretty much for the technician roles. They're nearly all level 3 apprenticeships. The provider gets funding in order to fund them to do those courses, so it's worth bearing that in mind. And very often the provider will deliver that for the apprentice themselves, and they will have to do functional skills, English or maths, and or maths. The training provider will also look at if there's any additional learning needs that they may have. So for example, if they have dyslexia or another learning condition that they need support for, and will provide some adjustments for that, and perhaps suggest to you as the employer to provide adjustments. It should be encouraged to get a diverse pool of apprentices. So it may well be that you need support from your HR colleagues in order to make reasonable adjustments to support apprentices to complete. The apprenticeship is structured, and the training provider should detail how that will be structured. This can be a frustration if it's not, you don't get this information from your training provider, and my view is you just chase and chase and chase to get it. So you as managers need to know when and how the knowledge, skills and behaviours in the standard will be covered. So what bits are you covering, what bits on the job training, and what bits are the training provider covering? The training provider and the funding rules are responsible for the off-the-job training and making sure that happens and is planned and delivered. They're also receiving a substantial fee for that. So, do see yourselves as the customers of the training provider, and we want to get the best experience for our apprentices from them. What I always like our providers to do and encourage them to do is do a basic roadmap to the endpoint assessment. Sometimes you might think, oh, it's a 3-4-year apprenticeship. I know our engineering technicians are on 4 years, and that can seem like ages away, but time goes quite quickly. So it's really useful to have the roadmap so you can check on where is the apprentice compared to where we wanted them to be at this point. Are they ahead? Are they behind? Because if they get behind, then you might need a bit of an intervention to help them. Dates, times, and methods and venues of the taught sessions, obviously important. The apprentice knows where they're going, what time they're going, and all of those things. And then introductions to the main points. So I think you should have all of that information really within the first couple of weeks of your apprentice starting. And if not, you should be raising that with your training provider. Enrolment will include the 3 documents below we've already spoken about, but the apprenticeship agreement is a really straightforward agreement. And it's basically to make sure that the apprentice knows they are on a government regulated and recognised apprenticeship, and that it's approved apprenticeship. Sometimes the education provider will do that. We sometimes just do that ourselves because it is a government template you can just go online and get. But often the training provider will cover that. The training plan is about will show the responsibilities and roles that everyone will play, and we have a slide a bit later on that covers that. But it's important that everyone essentially signs to commit that they will support the apprenticeship to work. And the provider contract we've spoken about, but as I say, be very careful if your provider is saying that you must sign their contract. Check it with your procurement team. I know we have had in the past where people have put recruitment fees and things like that in there. So it's really important to make sure that you check there's no clauses that you wouldn't be happy with in that contract. The Digital Apprenticeship Service, or it was called DAS, it's now called AS, is where the levy is, and someone in your institute will hold that. It could be in HR, it could be in finance or payroll. Essentially, it's where you put the details of the apprentice in and submit it to the provider. It's really important that this happens in a timely manner because the provider payments start when they submit what's called an ILR, an individual learning record. They can only do that once the apprentice is registered on the system. What happens is the fee for the whole course is divided up. 20% is held back for the endpoint assessment, which we'll talk about later, and then 80% is divided proportionally by months. So if it's a 2-year apprenticeship, it would be divided by 24 months and paid on a monthly basis, providing your provider submits an individual learning record. You may well recruit an apprentice that's been on another apprenticeship, so it's worth making sure that they have formally removed from that apprenticeship. If they're on another employer's account, you can't start them. So it is worth checking that out. It happens less than it used to, but particularly if you've got an apprentice that may well have an additional hospitality role, they might well be on a hospitality apprenticeship and unfortunately not necessarily know it. So it's worth checking that out. So just some tips for us on enrolment. Read all the documents, question, negotiate, seek advice from colleagues. Support your apprentice to understand what they're signing. You know, some of your apprentices might not do that, but make sure that time is taken. So the documents shouldn't just be sent over email. You really should meet with the training provider and an assessor or a coach that they will have for your apprentice to go through those documents and what they mean. Agree as much as possible before the apprentice starts, so you know what they're going to be doing when they're doing it. That will help with planning. Align the employment start date with the training provider start date to avoid having to extend contracts. Question the value for money and the course and set expectations. And map in how you can support the apprentice with the on and off job training to support the learning in line with the learning plan. So again, if you know they're going to be studying this particular technique at college in November, then maybe it's worth trying to give them some practical experience of doing that technique in a real life setting around that time. So I'm now going to pass over to Karen, who's going to talk a bit about the first 3 months of the apprenticeship and what our kind of view is important to make the apprenticeship successful.
Thank you, Caleb. Okay, I think depending on where you are as well with your apprenticeship sort of process, if this is the first time for you as an apprenticeship manager as well, bear that in mind. Don't kind of beat yourself up about that. Your training provider can really, really help you They're experts in delivering this. They're experts in dealing with a whole range of employers as well. So use your training provider to support you. As Caleb has said, we're also, you're also paying them as well. Key things you can do, obviously, make sure your apprentice feels welcome and valued. Don't try and sort of reinvent the wheel. Certainly when I have done inductions, use your standard staff induction process. If you've got a process already in place that is thorough, inclusive, includes all of your institute's HR type trainings and processes, that will automatically make your apprentice feel a valued member of staff, that they're getting the same induction for the most part as regular staff, not on apprenticeships. Think of quick wins where the apprentice can start contributing. They're going to be filling in lots of forms. For some of them, it's going to be their first job. They're going to spend a good 2 or 3 weeks doing things like mandatory training, a bit of shadowing to learn a few processes. It can be a bit overloading. So maybe break the induction up a little bit and have a few days where they might simply be, I don't know, in a laboratory, those of you that understand the lab work, things like racking tips or doing some labeling. Get them to do and be involved in some of the preparation of the work of the team that they're in. Don't expect them to hit the ground running. As well as the subject matter of the apprenticeship they're doing and the team they're working in, a lot of them, this, as I said, this is their first job, so they're going to be learning about the whys and wherefores of working as well. So it's quite a lot for them to take in. Make sure you meet regularly with your apprentice. I would say the first 3 months, it's probably, I think in the first month I kind of met weekly because there was so much induction stuff. And some of those chats might just be 5 or 10 minutes. Others might be a slightly longer, more formal one-to-one. Right from the start, you've got to make sure your apprentice is logging their off-the-job training hours. That's really important. The induction process is off-the-job training. It's new things, it's new learning. Some of the induction process will be slightly more formal training courses, whether that be online or face-to-face. All of that information can be logged and should be logged. They will also be doing some shadowing and learning new processes that the team carry out. That can all be logged as well. So, don't what's the word? So the first 3 months of an apprenticeship, even though you feel they may not be, they're not going to be up to speed, that for your off-the-job training is a crucial and significant proportion of time. Make sure you keep in touch with your training provider, hold them to account. So if after 3 months and things, you've still not got access to the training platform that they use, keep asking. You need to be fully aware of what is going on. If it's an FE college, for example, what is going on for that apprentice at college. Make sure that apprentice has got access to all the systems and things they need to be able to do their education part of the process. Okay, Caleb? Okay, as the definition of an apprenticeship states, this is a job. It's a job with training. So from the job point of view, the apprentice, like any other employee, needs clarity around the roles and responsibilities. Okay, they're not going to have significant responsibilities, depending if we're talking, say, level 3 apprenticeships. However, they will have responsibilities in order to meet the expectations of their apprenticeship. So make sure they're fully supported. Use your operational team managers, maybe identify somebody within the team that might be kind of a buddy that they can shadow directly with. The apprentice themselves has got to apply, sorry, I'm overlapping a little bit here with the employer and the line manager. So you're assuring the apprentice is fully supported, but also ensure that the line managers are clear about the support they need to provide. Okay. The employer, as Caleb has outlined, you've got to make sure that you are fully compliant with your funding rules and facilitate the payments. That is likely to be somebody in HR or in your payroll system. The work, the day-to-day activities that an apprentice will do need to map across to the apprenticeship standard. Okay, so make sure that that is clear, and that you can almost work backwards, if you like, from the standard, right? These are the activities of the standard. What type of activities in the workplace can I get the apprentice to do that will help them meet those standard requirements? So you could work in both directions there. Support the apprentice to collate their evidence. A lot of their evidence collation is around written work, it's taking photographs, it's making copies of documents or safe systems of work or examples, and make sure they know how to upload all that to their portfolio management system. And you can do that in conjunction with the training provider as well. You can give them whole projects that would map to an apprenticeship. So one project might mean they can achieve a whole range of the duties on the standard and the knowledge and skills and behaviours evidence as well. Excuse me. It's really important to make sure you have meetings with the education, the training provider and the apprentice, and that's a tripartite meeting. So that's you as the employer, the training provider and the apprentice. You've got to make sure you're all heading in the right direction. You've all got the information that you need. Everybody's clear what's going on. They're probably sort of, I don't know, once every 2 or 3 months. Some of it might depend on the training provider. Some training providers want to meet more regularly than that, but just make sure you've got a series of meetings booked in. The employer is responsible to raise any concerns or issues to the training provider. So, for example, things like poor attendance of the apprentice at work. You need to be having those conversations with the training provider. It could be likely that the individual is not attending college as well. And if you can marry up any concerns, it makes the whole process a lot easier. You have to provide the apprentice time for their off-the-job training. That's your 6 hours. That can happen in a variety of ways. If the apprentice is attending a training provider, such as a college, that's quite often a day a week, fitting in with term time. But it can manifest itself in a whole range of different ways, the off-the-job training. And then you support the apprentice to prepare for the endpoint assessment. So that's around making sure all their portfolio of evidence, anything they need from the workplace as evidence, help them get that together, because that will all then be submitted as part of the endpoint assessment preparation. Thank you, Caleb. The training provider, we've overlapped a few of these things and Caleb highlighted these. I think the training provider's roles and responsibilities are a little bit more sort of transactional and process driven almost. They are the experts in this. They provide a lot of obviously apprenticeships for people. So you've got to make sure the training provider has to make sure that they're complying with all the rules. If there is a mandatory qualification associated with the apprenticeship, the training provider needs to be delivering that qualification. So just make sure that the apprentice's time studying is actually happening and they're getting that information to enable the achievement of that qualification. Make sure they're sticking with the schedule of learning. If the apprentice is going to college regularly, that'll be a timetabled based system as well. We've talked about the employer raising any concerns to the training provider. It needs to go the other way as well. The training provider needs to raise any concerns back to the employer too. All of the irregular assessment and marking of things that training providers do, they are responsible for that. Excuse me. And they would take the lead on the tripartite meetings that I mentioned previously. While the employer has to support the apprentice to produce evidence and things for their endpoint assessment, it's the training provider's responsibility to really steer the apprentice through to endpoint assessment. They should have a full overview of whether that apprentice is ready to enter into what we call the gateway. And they arrange all the formal side of the assessments. When the assessment is finished, they arrange the certification. sometimes that changes, doesn't it, Caleb? Sometimes certificates can come to the employer. I think it just depends on who the assessor might be.
Yeah, it depends as well on the address that the is submitted to the employee assessment organisation. So sometimes the training provider will fill that form out, sometimes the apprentice will, sometimes the line manager will, and they might all put down different addresses. So it might be the lab is put down, it might be the home address of the apprentice, or it might be a more generic university address, which means it could get lost in your
we
internal post
definitely don't
systems.
want the certificates to be being lost. That's what the apprentices work to at the end. And then the training provider supports the apprentice to achieve any functional skills requirements. So yeah, okay, thank you. And then the apprentice. I don't know if it's first and foremost, they are a paid employee. Okay, so they do have responsibilities in line with other members of staff, and the terms of their employment apply as they would do for any other member of staff. So things like, code of conduct at work, that applies to the apprentice. And for them, complying with a code of conduct and things is all about them learning how to be in the workplace as well for them. They need to follow the schedule of learning and also follow the objectives and things. Lots of us obviously in higher education institutes, we're following our taught timetable. So that's quite a good steer for the apprentice. They know what's coming. It's quite fixed. It's quite regular. Again, if the apprentice has got any concerns, they need to raise those with the employer. It might be that they have some concerns with the training provider, for example. So the employer can support the apprentice in addressing those. They've got to complete all their assignments in a timely manner. So assignments will come from their training provider, but they may have questions about assignments that they might bring into the workplace. They may ask their colleagues, they may ask the operational manager for some support and things like that. They've got to attend the taught sessions, so whether that is their day a week or whether that's block booking, and they will be given an apprenticeship lead, and they need to fully engage with them as well. We've talked about the online platform before, so they need to use the online platform, and that's where they submit all their evidence. That's where they submit assignments. It's got calendars inbuilt, so all their meetings and things are in there too, and it links directly into the standard that they're working towards. It's all completely mapped out. KSBs are all, it's really detailed. They break the standard right down into how that apprentice is going to achieve all the KSBs of the standard. There's a variety of platforms around. There's Smart Assessor, there's Aptem, OneFile, a whole range. It depends on your training provider which platform they use. I've got 2 different ones for my apprentices. I'm sure Caleb's probably working with goodness knows how many from different providers. Yeah,
I think we have 5 different ones, and they're all they all have their strengths and weaknesses, like any system.
They do. Yes, thank you.
And just to say on that, on the role of the apprentice, sometimes it's their first ever job. I know I've just met with one of our new technicians apprentices who's just starting in August and has just completed A-levels. We tend to start them a bit earlier just to embed them in before the mad rush in September comes, and we add that month onto the contract. And it is their first place of work, so they're not necessarily sure on workplace norms. So it's useful to try and gradually build them into that and make them really feel welcome as part of the team. Did you want to say anything on that, Karen, before I talk about the lovely 6-hour rule?
Yeah, no, I think that I agree. I think to help you as employers, as I said before, don't reinvent the wheel. And actually as well, if you've got other members of staff that are starting, almost regardless of grades and levels, those members of staff are going to have an induction program themselves. So it might be that you can link the apprentice in and do some induction and training of new staff members and the apprentice at the same time. And then that helps them form a link. That helps them see that even slightly more experienced employees still need an induction to their new place of work. And at the end of the day as well, let's face it, it saves on time. If something's happening already and it's appropriate for that apprentice to attend and be a part of, use that. It will really help you as a manager and as an employer.
Thanks, Karen. I think it's a really good point, and I know that some of the managers I've spoken to have said it's really made them reflect on their induction process just generally. So there's benefits you might not think of in taking on an apprentice. So now move on to the 6-hour rule, and the 6-hour rule replaced what you may well remember as the 20% off the job rule. It's always a bit of a contentious, it can be a contentious rule, so there's lots of debate on how this element of the apprenticeship is covered. But the reason for the rule is to make sure that there is definite protected learning time for apprentices, to make sure that no one is using the apprenticeship scheme for things that it shouldn't be used for. So it's there to make sure that the apprentice has protected learning time. So the government definition is training received by the apprentice within the practical period, so not the assessment period. And I should just note the 6-hour rule does not apply once the apprentice has moved through gateway and is being assessed at the end of the apprenticeship. It is for the learning period only. Although I would encourage managers to release apprentices for time to prepare for their exam, for observation or whatever. It should be during the normal working hours. So whilst, yet of course, apprentices can go above and beyond and do research, particularly the higher level ones, research in their own time, the apprenticeship should be able to be completed in normal working hours. That's quite an important point. And it's for achieving knowledge, skills and behaviours the apprentice is undertaking. And there it says normal paid hours, not including overtime. The main points to note on it, it's 6 hours per week on average. So doesn't have to be 6 hours every week. So you could have 6 hours one week, 0 hours one week and 12 hours another week. Often some of that, as Karen's already said, will be dictated by what your training provider gives you in terms of direct input. So if they're at college for a full day, that will easily probably cover the 6 hours and more. So that's the input of the theory and the practical training there. It can also include shadowing and certain time spent on projects. So it must link to the apprenticeship standard and it must include new learning. So it can't include repeating something. It has to be brand new learning for the apprentice. So they're supported to use a piece of kit for the first time. That it's kind of where it's a bit of a grey area. But if it's brand new, you could argue it's off the job. If it's they're doing it assisted for the first time after having shadowed, then it would become on the job learning. It includes shadowing, as I've said, and also assignments as well. It doesn't include the tripartite meetings, so the review meetings with your training provider, exams, any functional skills, or any activities that are not new learning, or anything indeed that's not related to the apprenticeship standard. And there's a link there that gives a really useful kind of slide from the Education and Skills Funding Agency on what can be recorded as off-the-job learning, and obviously that would be available later. So I'm going to pass to Karen just to talk now through the endpoint assessment process.
Right, the endpoint assessment is usually done by an independent body. Again, there's a whole host of those depending on the nature of the standard that you're using, the subject area you're in. Sometimes it's a professional body or institute. Engineering is a classic example there. But your training provider will, obviously, they're the ones that know who your endpoint assessor is, and they will steer you through all of this, okay? It can take up to 3 months to complete. An apprentice enters into what we call the gateway, and at that point, you as an employer and the training provider are saying that the apprentice is ready for their assessment. The reason there's a time frame is to give flexibility within that. Also, you've got to book dates in for assessment with the endpoint assessor, so their availability may have to be flexible as well. We refer to the 20% there, so the 6-hour rule is not in place for the assessment period, as Caleb mentioned. The idea being is that they've done their off-the-job training, they've done their off-the-job learning and collated it all together, and we're now saying they're ready for assessment. What you would want to give them, though, as an employer, is time to prepare for those assessments, and actually time to do their assessments as well. So, yeah. I've mentioned that the training provider has the contract with the endpoint assessor. At the beginning of today's session, Caleb talked about the breakdown of how the fees are paid, and 20% of your fees are held back until the assessment is completed. Okay, once that happens, then the system pays the, does it go to the education provider, and then they will pay the assessors if they need to? Yeah, that's fine. Limited retakes are possible. I think that varies as well with assessors and subjects and levels and all that kind of thing. You hopefully don't want to be in that situation. That's another thing as well, to use the time frame of an apprentice entering a gateway and actually having assessment. Just take a bit of time to double check documents, portfolios, all that kind of thing, so that you're hopefully not in that category of needing any form of retake. Working backwards, it's really important that both the apprentice and their line manager, their employer line manager, are clear about what the expectations are in the assessment right at the start of the apprenticeship. So, for example, laboratory technician apprenticeship, part of the assessment there is an observation, and that is an observation of the apprentice setting out a laboratory. If you know that is going to be the assessment process, and you know that right from the start, everything that apprentice does should focus on, why am I setting out the laboratory in this way? What documents do I need? Because they have to recite what they are doing for that whole assessment period. So if you can start training them on the assessment process, the knowledge they need in that assessment will come throughout the apprenticeship. So it's a bit of a mindset, really. Some of them have a test to do, a written test. Again, you can practice doing past papers and things like that. So as long as you're clear and you know what the assessment form is going to take, it does help you right throughout the apprenticeship in terms of practicing and being ready.
Yeah, and encourage your provider to do mocks as well. And if you can do mocks with your apprentice, do them. And just a point on retakes, I know sometimes there's a limitation on how many retakes the provider can fund with the endpoint assessment organisation. So just check your contracts with them in case there's an additional fee for any retakes.
So we've talked about the gateway briefly. So yeah, this is a three-way meeting between the provider, the employer and their apprentice. And all three of you need to agree that the apprentice is ready for the assessment. Assessments vary. It depends what is set out with that standard. There are a whole host of ways that can be assessed, and it's not all of these things. It will be an example or a few of these particular processes that they can undertake. The endpoint assessor will often communicate with the apprentice directly. My experience is not that so far, Caleb, but have you had that?
A mixture. So I think it depends, as you say, on the endpoint assessment organisation, and very often it depends on the name put down in the form by your training provider when it's referred over. And we've had it, with the same endpoint assessment organisation contact the manager with one case and the apprentice directly with another case. So it doesn't always work how you'd expect.
Yeah, I think for me, if the apprentice feels they're getting some communication that they just don't understand and are not sure about, as long as by this point you should have a relationship that they should be comfortable coming to you going, I've got this, I don't know what it means, or going to their training provider or their tutor, I've got this, I don't know what it means. So just make sure that it might be outlined to them, it might be a possibility they might get some contact from the assessors. Yeah.
And Karen, I know we've had some of our engineering technician apprentices where the actual date for their assessment has been sent to the apprentice's personal email and has gone into their junk. So they've
right.
So it is really a point to check with your apprentice to make sure that they know when their assessment is and they're looking out for it on all channels. But I do think it comes down to the email address that's put in by the training provider. So worth clarifying that at the gateway stage.
Okay, so when we go right back to the beginning about induction and trying to tie up your induction and start date with your employer and your training provider, at that point, hopefully they will have a work-based email or even a college-based email. Try and steer them away from use of personal emails. Up to that point, when you're doing, say, for example, it is August, they may not have registered fully with work, fully with college. You may have to use their personal email address just for your communications. but try and steer away from that once things are becoming more formalized with both employer and training provider. We've talked about the certificate. Again, that clearly depends on what you fill in on the form, where it gets sent. So just double check that. And then in the background, hopefully when things are finished, the remaining 20% is taken from your digital account and paid into to the training provider. That would happen again, obviously, with either payroll or HROD. Okay. Work with your training provider to create a bit of a roadmap to the endpoint assessment. Don't leave it all till the last minute. Some of this, again, will probably depend on the endpoint assessment organization. You know, if they're incredibly busy, all that kind of thing, you need to be clear about how that process is going to work and the dates, etc., etc. As we've discussed throughout the whole of the presentation today, make sure you have regular updates on your progress throughout the apprenticeship. You don't want to be in a situation, particularly as an employer, where you you have a tripartite meeting, for example, and all of a sudden the training provider is saying they're not progressing at all, that they've either not been attending or they've not been completing their assignments. You don't want those meetings to be a shock. You need to make sure you've got a clear outline of how your apprentice is progressing, and be honest. Ask that question: how is my apprentice progressing? What is their progress like? Continue to make sure they submit their evidence. In my experience, go sort of overkill. Anything they do, opening a door, making a cup of coffee, whatever, evidence, take a photograph of it, just because you don't want to be in a position where you're lacking evidence for their off-the-job training. It's quite hard to backtrack and do things retrospectively. Make sure your training provider also stays on track. Every training provider is different in their involvement with the apprentices. Give the time, and support your apprentice ready for the endpoint assessment. That's key. I'm giving one of my apprentices a bit more time away from work at the moment to do some preparation and practicing and dot the I's and cross the T's. If business allows, then provide that. And then the key thing as well, for me, this is a personal thing really, I think it's really important to support the apprentices with their next steps. And unfortunately, the definition and the process of an apprenticeship is that there is no guaranteed permanent role at the end of it. Lots of apprentices do get taken on by their employer into higher roles or permanent roles or whatever. But you've invested this time, you've provided them with skills and knowledge and all sorts of things. So really important to provide them with some support about what they want to do next. If they're making a choice to leave your organization, yes, that's sad. You feel like you've invested in them. But the positives is that you've given them the skills and the background for them to be able to do that and to move on to things. So yeah, your apprentice will have they'll all have different ideas about what they want to do next. Okay.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
And just to mention on the education technician standard, a bit of a reminder, we did discuss this last week, but it's now live, ready to use. It's a level 3 standard that was designed by university technical managers with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. We're already reviewing the standard to see how it can be improved. The Institute's processes have got a bit better, so it's hopefully we can make some really good changes to the standard. And we've had a few people from last week get in touch about joining this group, which is fantastic. If anyone else wants to join, please do consider joining. It is an active group, so what the purpose of the group will be doing is looking at the existing standard, what's working, what isn't working, what within the rules of the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education we can change and improve on the standard. And the first meeting will be up at NTDC on the 10th of July. So it'll be great to see people there. So if you're interested, just either through NTDC or directly to me, just drop me an email and we can get you up to date. There's probably a commitment to 2 or 3 meetings a year, and then actively reviewing documents and suggesting changes as the year progresses. And finally, Karen's just going to say a bit on the new network we've got for technical managers.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, Caleb and I have been doing sort of these workshops and presentations for 18 months or so now, and obviously the traction is taking with more and more technical apprentices being taken on, and as such there are now more managers out there who are managing apprentices. So we've had, based on feedback as well from attendees at various presentations, questions being asked to the NTDC, we felt there was a real need for a network for technical apprenticeship managers. So this isn't for the apprentices, this is for the managers of apprentices. So you're more than welcome to join the network. We're still planning what meetings and events and stuff we're delivering. This is brand new. It runs through the JISC mailing system, so you can scan the QR code on the screen now, or if you go to the NTDC site afterwards as well, there's information there. The JISC mailing system works on the principle that if you want to ask a question and send it to that, it fires it out across the network, and people might be able to provide the answers there and then. So it's continual in the background, but we are hoping that we will have some more structured get-togethers and events steered by members of the network. So if you've got any ideas about things for us to discuss and meet about, that's brilliant. Keith is singing the praises of the mailing system already. Thank you, Keith. And yeah, it's a work in progress, and you know, that whole cheesy saying of the network is built by the people who are in the network. That's how it's going to get steered. So yeah, thank you, Caleb.
Thanks, Karen. I think it's a really good idea, you know, to share best practice, because whilst Karen and I give our experience and our tips, etc., you know, there's other technical managers out there, other people that recruit apprentices, and you know that Karen and I don't know everything. So, you know, it's great to share these really good ideas and learn new information from each other as well. So thank you to those who've joined that network, and if you haven't, please do consider joining. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I appreciate we've only got about 5 minutes for questions. So let's see if there's any. I don't know if there's any in the chat. So there's a question on a particular training provider. I'll leave people to respond to that in the chat. I haven't particularly used that provider, so I'm afraid I can't kind of. So any questions? If anyone has any questions for Karen and I, we've got 5 minutes. I mean, feel free to send them in afterwards. I think there was a link there as well. Sam.
Hi, just want to know, I'm part of a small team. We're term time only. How does that affect an apprenticeship role?
Good question. So if the staff are on term time only contracts, you can have apprentices on term time only contracts. The duration needs to be adjusted though, so it could be a longer contract potentially. And that's really something that the training provider will work with you on. As long as they're on proper employment contracts, what you can't have is someone on like a casual contract or something like that. Yeah. They have to be on a particular contract, but it can be less than the guided sort of 36, the usual 36, 37 hours, etc. Okay. It's just if it's below 30 hours, the amount of off the job time, the duration has to be increased and looked on. As a calculation the training provider will do for you. So it's a conversation to have with them before you out to recruitment.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Any more questions? Letting Karen and I off quite lightly today.
Yeah. This is part of the reason though for the network as well, I think. Oh, sorry, Emma.
Emma.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Emma.
Can you hear me? Hi. My question is about, you spoke about, it said assignments can count towards the 6 hours. Does that mean college assignments?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I'm starting an apprenticeship myself actually in the next few weeks, and so I'll be learning this from the other side out, and I'm curious myself as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Emma. And best luck. What apprenticeship are you doing?
A coaching professional.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah, excited. Thank you.
I would say that what you just have to be mindful of is that it is new knowledge a learning, not as purely assessment. So
Yeah.
the assignment has to have some element of new knowledge and learning in, and you need to be able to evidence that. The off-the-job hours, by the way, is something that's regulated on the training provider side. The employer's responsibility is to provide the information to the training provider, but it's the training provider's duty to construct that off-the-job time with the employer's support. So the emphasis is on the training provider doing that, because they're the ones that are audited by ESFA and Ofsted.
That's great, Emma.
Will we be sharing the slides for part 1 and part 2? Yeah, we will. Sav, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll be sharing them. I'll upload this video once the recording's over, and then I'll also share both part 1 and part 2 slides. So I'll make sure they're circulated to everyone that was registered as well.
Thank you, Sav. That's great.
Brilliant, thank you. So I hope people have found it useful today. Obviously, it's the second part of the two. So if you haven't managed to see the first part, do go back and look at that. And yeah, feel free to contact Karen and I through NTDC with any other questions that you may think of down the line. Yeah, just hope it's been really helpful for you.
Yeah, I'm glad. That's good. Yeah, people are saying helpful. Yeah, and this is partly where the network comes from. We try and cover as much as we can in these, but people will always have questions based on their experience, and it's useful for us. I wasn't aware of the term time only contract ability to still do an apprenticeship. So even I've learned something today. So that's marvelous. Thank you very much, Sam. Yes, brilliant. Okay, lovely. Okay, so just a comment. So Emma, second time and I've been able to see our fire progress since the last year. Excellent, that's really great, thank you. Yeah, your feedback and input is just as important.
And if there's anything, for the sessions in the future you'd like included, let us know, because Karen and I can have a look at that and try and expand upon that.
I will also be circulating a feedback form when I send around the videos and things. So if people do have any suggestions, even if they might seem a little out there, do put them in, because it's likely that other people will be thinking the same.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, everybody.